I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. When Addison Rae headlined Coachella this year and the crowd lost it to Fame as a Gun, the cultural momentum felt instant. But the social infrastructure behind the track was built months in advance, one creator at a time, by Griffin Haddrill and his team at Elevate. By moving past the standard 48-hour launch spike and focusing on an always-on creator strategy, they drove over 80 million views and a staggering 9% engagement rate. My interview with Griffin is coming right up, but first. Griffin Haddrill, welcome to On Brand.
Hey, Nick, it's great. It's great to be here. Excited to chat.
So, when you have a client that is involved in something at Coachella, everybody on the team is probably wondering, does this mean we get to go to Coachella?
That's a good question. Actually, most of the time, no. But in the instances that we do show up, and obviously when you have a cultural moment like Coachella, which I view it not just an entertainment event, I now view it as a global cultural moment and like a launch pad for artists, brands, and creators. We show up. So at least we had some of our team there, and we're always happy to show up for those moments. We want to show up for those moments.
Well, that's an interesting kind of definition of the event too, because I think all of us have a kind of general cultural awareness of Coachella, but it's a great example of something that even for those not in attendance, me, and that is probably not the primary audience target, though I believe David Byrne was there, and that would fit my profile. But I was aware of it because of kind of the ripples outward that an event like that has. And there's an online, offline component, but especially, I know I mentioned always on earlier, but those moments are increasingly rare, it seems, when everyone is kind of tuned into something.
Yeah, I would agree. It's interesting because marketing moves in seasonality, or how I think consumers interact with marketing moves in sort of in ebbs and flows through seasons. I think we can look back to COVID and say that so many of these impactful moments that we digested, we interpreted, were truly online, right? So solely online is where you saw creators and podcasters and filmmakers and anyone that was living in our attention economy was making their impact in a digital first world. I think now that the world is outside and living in the real world more, more and more every day, and interacting and touching and feeling and seeing brands and looking through window shops, we see that there's now more than ever large in-person events such as Coachella, or such as Rolling Loud, or such as these large festivals or Art Basel or other things of the nature, are transcending into cultural in major ways, all through the internet being the lens of which you see it through, unless you're an attendee. And the attendees of the events are now the megaphone, if you will, to the rest of the world who aren't there physically.
So as you talk about finding these moments, I feel like it also represents a shift strategically. So you talk about something like the track drop and the work that you and the team did around that. And I feel like there's a strategic change there as well, because it's less of a single launch event, and really something that, just like the event itself, has kind of the almost concentric circles of what's happening at the event, all the people there with the megaphones sharing that for the audience at large. Likewise, it would seem like your strategy has to be almost parallel to those concentric circles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where we see a lot of people miss in that moment, is there has to be strategy that aligns with the in-person event or the IRL moment, let's call it. And so for us, we're always thinking about how are we leading into the campaign with education, right? I think the internet is busy and very muddied most of the days, and your feed is super segmented from the next person or someone else in a different household, and so you're going to see different stuff from your neighbor and so on and so forth. And so our strategy is always making sure we're reaching the right audiences early, building influencer and creative and trend creative that reaches the segments of audiences that we want it to reach to, so that eventually, and you do that repetitiously, it's kind of like the war of attrition. You're going in there and every day you're more creators, more content around the song, around the artist, and in this case, Addison Rae, and then leading into the big performance, right? And that's kind of like the cultural burst moment where we see, the largest J curve, but everything leading up to that is trying to build momentum around the song, around the artist, or in a lot of cases around brands.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, it seems like it's this. I mean, I know we're talking about music, which in and of itself is an art, but it also seems like it's a real balance of really kind of the art and science of the strategy of finding influencer content aligned with the demographics you want to reach. How do you, is there a framework for testing that out, for seeding content without diluting the core narrative and connecting with the right audience?
So for us, we're probably a little bit more, I would say, patient in that process, and patient might not even be the right word. What we try to always balance is authenticity to make sure that the narrative feels authentic to audiences. And it's hard, right? Every video that you see now on the internet is it's a branded piece of content or it's paid or it feels very contrived. And it's like, we live in this like ad bubble, especially in the United States. And when we do international campaigns, it's less so because they're not as, consumer heavy or consumer advertised heavy as US audiences are. But the way that we approach it is we spend a lot of time in the exploration. So we find and source creators, influencers globally, big or small. We then will come up with the creative. So we're developing the trend or the creative that they're participating in on the internet to market a brand or a song. And when we put those two things together, and if we do our jobs really well, and we marry creative with influencer with what the core audience that we're trying to target is, we can slowly seed out that narrative or quickly seed out that narrative, depending on timelines, to make sure that it feels organic, that it feels authentic, and that we're reaching the people that we want to reach, which at the end of the day are going to be the people who consume.
So we've been talking about finding the right people, but beyond that, there's engagement. And an average engagement rate of 9% is incredibly
Yeah.
high for a campaign. What are I mean, I guess probably not to bury the lead. How'd you do that? And what are the common mistakes that you see agencies making that tank engagement? Um, and how have you managed to avoid them?
Well, the on the first part, like that marrying process that I talked about earlier of finding the right creative, making sure that what I'm saying on camera feels real to you. If you're my audience, I want to make sure that it feels real to you, that it feels something that you're interested in. And if I find out that, you know, Nick, you love cars, and but you don't like any car, and this is the depth of things that we're going to. You don't like European cars, and you don't like no, you like classic hot rods for whatever reason. I'm making this up, but I have to make sure now. A couple years ago, I could be broader in that. I could go, hey, I just know that Nick likes cars. Now I got to go, no. Nick likes hot rod cars, and the only hot rod cars Nick likes are red, and that's my audience. And I'm trying to find a lot of Nicks that like red hot rod cars. My approach needs to be, well, the creators that live in the internet that have red hot rod classic cars, they're going to be my target, and they're going to talk about them as if they're the crown jewel. Because if they drive red hot rod cars, you might not even engage because you go, I already follow this creator. It's just another video about red hot rod cars. But if they talk about, no, red hot rod cars are the crown jewel, and that speaks to you, there needs to be depth in my strategy and depth in marketing, or depth in our approach. I think that's where a lot of people miss. And when we think about other agencies, or when we think about brands, I think they're taking a shallower approach in how they're thinking about their audiences and their end consumer. They're saying, well, we're trying to market cars. And I would argue to say that no, you're marketing cars to men who live in the Midwest who like red hot rod cars, who have are in a socioeconomic status of X. And I think that's the depth that we need to be approaching organic marketing, like influencer, so that eventually when you decide to do paid, if paid's a part of your strategy, that you've already reached your core audience, and now you're testing out new audiences and new subcategories of audiences within that. So that's where we see people miss. And I think when we see our engagement rates, and you can look at a 9% engagement rate company wide for us, and we would say, yeah, it's an incredible engagement rate. It is, but that's standard for us. That's the threshold of standardization that we hold ourselves to, because we know that if we do our jobs well in matching the influencer and matching the creative, that 9% engagement rate should be the threshold of standard work for us. And exceptional work, could look a lot higher.
Well, I feel like I have to point out I do not have a hot rod, but I do have a red car. So you were I think your intuitive powers were working even then.
Yeah, it turns out
On
we're all
brand, we'll be right
telepathic.
back. On brand, we'll be right back after this. Now, back to the show. So, when massive, unscripted cultural moments happen, like the Grammys appearance or Olivia Rodrigo jumping on stage at Coachella, how's your team structured to rapidly deploy content and capture what could seems a lot like lightning in a bottle?
That is a good question. We are probably uniquely positioned in understanding that the internet moves fast, and every day we're changing our playbook, right? So there's never a single day that we would say, there's never a moment where we look back and we go, that strategy worked. Let's try it now. We're always looking at it as, what's the new strategy? How do we test that in a small way without overspending? And then how do we deploy iterative moments of that? So our team is developed and focused around speed to market, speed to campaign strategy, speed to R&D. That sits at the forefront of our minds 24/7. It's the only way that we can remain effective with artists or companies. And when you see moments that are lightning in a bottle, if you will, we have a couple different ways that we might capture that lightning in a bottle. And one of the big ways that we're seeing now in the evolution of social has moved to clipping. And essentially clipping, you might see it now. You might open up your TikTok or Instagram and you're seeing hundreds of videos from a single creator or from a single moment that happened on the red carpet or in a movie, or for a company, for an artist, whatever it may be. And essentially what that is thousands of editors all around the world that are developing content in real time around a single moment and posting about it to drive marketing and drive narrative. And so if you think about the underbelly, influencer might be the layer that sits at the forefront of culture right now, but clipping is sort of the underbelly of social strategy that so many companies and artists are taking advantage of because they understand it's a quantity game. And so we sit at the forefront of that, where we can deploy content into a clipping strategy. We have a couple thousand editors that we all have organized in an org, and we can deploy our content very quickly and generate thousands of clips in days that generate tens of millions of views in a very short period of time. We don't know how long that's here to stay, but in the short term, we're seeing that that's a super effective strategy and one that works on a short timeline.
I feel like we're uncovering some big kind of attention economy dynamics at play right now, because you talking about the editors and really a creator led strategy, uh, versus, kind of flooding the zone around a drop. And I wonder how this approach changes the way that record labels or even legacy brands should think about budgeting for long-term partnership and growth.
There's an interesting reality now that I think is developing is I think brands and companies need to start thinking about two buckets, and they need to split those buckets up. And where those two sit is you're going to have an organic brand building or product building bucket that is just about awareness. And that bucket needs to be generating new eyeballs, reaching new people, and educating the people in the market, either of your brand or of IP that sits within your brand, whether it's a product, a makeup line, a movie, whatever it is, or a song in an artist case. And then there's this other side of their business. And that strategy, that organic strategy, is led typically with influencer or clipping, right? Or the editors sort of flooding the zone. The second is around performance. And the performance side of things, I think, is in the framework of conversion. How am I driving revenue and consumer interest and consumer purchase events? And where I think brands should start with is always starting with organic, seeing what resonates there, use it as a testing ground, use it as a lab experiment, but knowing that the subsequent ROI on that is going to be your brand is in front of new people and new people have been educated about your product. And take the best performing of that organic content and use it as the the tip of the spear for your performance marketing, and drive ads against the content that performed the best organically against the product that you want to sell. So more and more companies, I think, can't combine marketing into one org and say organic and paid are one unit. I think they need to think about things and say they're two separate, and these conversations need to be shared equally. And we need to start with organic and lead into performance. And we see that work extremely well. Everyone from startups, and I think startups could actually take the biggest advantage of that strategy, all the way to A-list blue chip brands.
So I feel compelled to ask, even though it feels like a generic podcast host question, but I would not be a podcast host in the year of our Lord 2026 and not ask about, when we talk about editors, creators, and the importance in this campaign and this strategy, about impacts of AI and how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. I
Ev-
don't know. I feel
You have to, I think you have to ask it now because it's the center of conversation more and more than ever before. I think a couple of things are happening. We're losing audience interest. We're losing attendance and we're losing time spent on platform because of AI. And so people like to think that, hey, AI is going to only increase time spent on platform. Well, I actually think the reverse is happening, and we're seeing that historically trend within platforms. The acceleration of AI content has pulled consumers and has segmented consumers' times on apps more now than ever before. So where they once were spending maybe 30 minutes on their favorite platform a day or an hour on their favorite platform a day, let's call it Instagram or TikTok, AI content has swept the For You page and the discovery pages. And that person who was spending an hour a year ago is now spending 40 minutes. And now they're increasing their time spent on another platform, or they're pulling back altogether. So I think one thing that we have to look hard and close at is going, AI is making creators' lives more efficient, brands' lives more efficient, but is it making the consumers' lives more interesting? And if they lose interest in these platforms because of AI, then those platforms become less effective in marketing. And what becomes more effective is in-person activations, events, and experiences. And I look at it as a balancing act. If we say there's so much time and attention that every consumer has in the world, I would argue to say that if one falls, the other one increases. And if one falls, the other, like it goes,
Yeah, yeah,
it's a
yeah.
seesaw. So that's impact number one. And I think that's something that we need to pay close, the world needs to pay close attention to. And I think the platforms need to hold themselves to an acute level of attention around that, because if those trends continue to hold true, the problem that we're going to have is effective marketing on social and digital will decrease. The other argument there is, and there's a sub argument in that, is saying, well, if AI gets so good in quality and interest and viability and all the things above, do people revert to their old consumer behaviors where they end up spending more time because AI content is entertaining? Now, that's a thesis that lives. My feeling is that audiences are intelligent and audiences are smart. We need to treat them that way. So even though that that bell curve of quality increases to a level that people might want to come back, I would argue to say that their consumer behaviors are just going to be adjusted, and they're going to feel as though social and digital platforms don't have real authentic content and they're not interacting with real people. And for those reasons, they decrease their interest. There's another argument within that. And so I'm going to go on a kind of a tangent, which is, now think about Gen Alpha or the generation following. They think about this and they might not know any different. So if they don't know any different, does their consumer behavior just adjust to that level versus Gen Z, millennials, and so on and so forth? So if they don't know any different, do their consumer behaviors adjust accordingly? And are we playing really a marathon race and not a short-term sprint? Something to think about. I'll leave that up in the air. The last thing I'll say about AI, which is how brands should utilize AI and how they should be thinking about utilizing AI, or companies or agencies. The advertiser, we ran an internal R&D study in our company where we took influencer content and AI influencer content, and we ran ads against both, same budget, same timeline, same creative. The human-led creative outperformed 3-1 the AI-led creative. And we spent hours developing the AI-led creative. So my argument would say that AI is an incredible tool.
Mm-hmm.
We're not quite there yet on where it might be for a conversion tool to the masses, but I think that's coming. I don't know what timeline that looks like. And brands should be aware of its capability to drive conversion and drive awareness, but I don't think they should be including it in their strategies just quite yet. I think they should be thinking about how they use it and putting brain power behind it and waiting for AI to catch up to a place where it feels so real that it could then lead a lot of their creative efforts. But I think we're transparently a year or two and maybe even more away.
Yeah. Well, your very detailed, insightful answer makes me feel better about asking the question that I felt was generic,
No, that's a
because,
good question.
well, I'm much more interested, rather than, I feel like a lot of times you get like apocalyptic predictions of it's gonna take over everything, it's
Yeah.
gonna all the jobs, and or you get into the tech and the gadgets, and I'm much more interested in how business leaders are thinking about this, how it's informing consumer insights, like you were just talking about. And I think that, um, yeah, it's a good question that is not always effectively answered, but you knocked the cover off the ball.
Well, thank you. It's like my dad said when I was a kid, he goes, if you fight productivity, you'll lose. So that's
Yeah.
always been my philosophy is productivity and progress is coming. And our job is not to fight it, but to learn as much as we can about it and be observant.
Well, and even through that lens, you talk about the thousands of creators, and if it's tools that's making their life easier. And as you said that, I thought about myself as a one person podcasting band. It does make my life a lot easier
Yeah.
in the creation of this very show.
That's fantastic. Well, that's great. I think more people need to use it for systems and processes, and there's a lot of tools in editing and art. So that's great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is now my turn to get to ask you, Griffin, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
It would be Elf Cosmetics. I was so blown away by their Liquid Death collab that they did, and I just thought it was genius and fun and disruptive. And when I see stuff like that, it puts a smile on my face ear to ear because it's two unique, disruptive brands coming together to create something very fun and cool for their consumers. And I think we need more of that. So they put a smile on my face.
Love it. Well, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Our website's a great place to go at www.lv8.co. So you'll get a lot of fun stuff there. And we're sort of a secret agency, if you will. But when we do
I
drop stuff, we do put stuff out. It's fun to follow and see what we're up to.
How has no one made that wordplay before of agencies and secret agencies? So that's it's a lot of fun.
I think people have, and we you realize it after the fact, but no, it's been a fun ride, and we wanted to tie in our home base, which is Las Vegas, into the business. So
I love it. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Griffin Haddrill, thanks for being on brand with us.
thanks, Nick.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.